Good morning from the UK. My name is Vikas Pota, and we're in peak summer over here. We're dying with the heat, which is in a country where we get lots of rain and grayness. Generally speaking, it's a pleasant environment to be in. But because our houses are not air conditioned or such, we do suffer from anything that's inclement climate. And so, welcome from a very, very hot summer's day in London, which is not something, like I said, that one would imagine someone from England ever saying. But what we use these opportunities for is to put new ideas in front of all of you. And I'm really pleased to have friends around the world who inspire me, who excite me, who stimulate my thinking. And I often think, well, how is it that we can bring these opportunities to those of you who also should benefit and share in such excitement? And so what I'm really pleased about today is today's session is really quite simple, actually. It's about the idea stems from actually from when people go on holiday, which in this hemisphere, people do a lot of it this time of year because schools are off. They often think about what books should I read? And I often get asked, like, are there any books that you'd recommend that I should read? And I often lean on my friends and said, hey, listen, what are you reading that you think that I should? And over the years, there's been some fantastic books I've read as a result of these recommendations. And what I wanted to do was use the same opportunity to ask two friends of mine from, actually, in this case, Southeast Asia, to actually weigh in and really share what their book recommendations were. And so, but before I ask and introduce them, I want to tell you about three books that either I'm reading or have read, which I think that those in the T4 community would love, actually. And I'll tell you a little bit about why I love them. Some of which may not make sense to you, but you would have to pick them up. So I have a bias for the books that I've chosen, actually coming from those that I've either met or those that I call friends. And so my first book recommendation is really around this author who, of course, I've heard of, but I had the pleasure of actually meeting maybe a month or so ago. And I thought this guy was just incredible. And the first book is Michael Morpurgo's War Horse. In England, we have something called a children's laureate that is appointed by the Queen, actually. And the children's laureate's job is to tell stories, to excite kids, to put them front and center of policy making, and in national consciousness. And Michael Morpurgo was one such character who was appointed this some years ago. But this particular book, War Horse, has been turned into a theater performance in the UK. Is very famous. But also Steven Spielberg has obviously done a film called War Horse, which is based on this book. What I loved about Michael when I met him in particular was just, and I think it's an obvious thing to say and state, but what I found quite fascinating about him was how accomplished a storyteller he was. And it shouldn't really come as a surprise, but it does to me sometimes when someone is just so fantastically entertaining and so imaginative in the way that they deliver even a book reading, which I was really pleased with. The second book that I have is one that I read so many years ago. And again, it's someone I've met, and I would consider him a friend if he would consider me one. And that is a book by a gentleman called Alex Beard called Natural Born Learners. Alex is someone who's very thoughtful about thinking through this topic about the future of education, but it illustrates it by actually taking a journey around the world and going to various school systems to see what they're doing and how this can inform the future of education. So he does all the obvious things, which are, he went to Finland, he's been to Singapore, he's gone to the US, gone to, some very high-tech schools. He was a teacher in a comprehensive school in inner London, which had its own challenges. And I thought this was a really great book actually to read. So Natural Born Learners from Alex Beard, something that I think you would enjoy reading. And the last book is something that I was really inspired by. And so, if you may know this, but I used to organize something called the Global Teacher Prize, and one of the winners of the prizes was an art teacher in London called Andrea Zafirakou, and she wrote like a book called "Those Who Can Teach: What It Takes to Make the Next Generation." And I think this is recommended reading now for anyone considering teaching as a profession. And it's not just, and Andrea I love to bits, and I know her very well. I serve on the board of her charity, but I expected her to write a memoir of sorts, like, this is where I was born, this is where I grew up, this is what I've done, these are the jobs I've done. But she's done something quite inspiring, which is every chapter looks at a particular child in her school and tells their story and tells about the inspiration, the trials and tribulations that a teacher goes through. And it's really fantastically written and something that I would absolutely recommend you to look at. So this is my friend Andrea Zafirakou's book, Those Who Can Teach: What It Takes to Make the Next Generation. And it's received some incredible reviews. So those are three books, and not necessarily, two of them were education and one of them was a children's book, which I hope you enjoy. Now, before I bring on my friends, I just want to say to everyone that you should comment online and interact with us in that way. That if you are watching on Facebook in particular, we want to see your comments and your faces and the avatars, and you have to give StreamYard.com/Facebook permission to flash this up, and I'll illustrate what I mean by actually flashing up a comment or two with people I don't know. So here we have someone who's saying, "Hello, everyone, watching from Croatia." Great. Thank you so much. We love Croatia and Croatian people, but who are you? We won't actually know this until you give StreamYard permission. And so I would say to you that if you go to, okay, I think this is who you are, Eterum. Thank you for putting that. But it'd be better if you went to StreamYard.com/Facebook and give it permission so that we could see your name and your photo of your Facebook profile. Now, friends, like I said, I'm thrilled to invite two friends to this who I think will be very thoughtful. The first is my friend Nina Adlan Disney, as we call it. Nina, welcome to this T4tv on Summer Book Showcase. Nina is the executive director of a social enterprise in Malaysia called Leap Ed, and a partner of the World's Best School Prizes. Welcome, Nina. And before we go any further, I would also want to introduce someone who interned for us, actually, called Urvi Doshi. Urvi is a fantastic, I would say, young person. I mean, is that being unfair? A young person who has just done a master's in education at the UCL Institute of Education on EdTech, and has worked in startups in that part of the world, and someone who helped with our Teacher Tech Summit, actually helped contribute to all the programming of our Teacher Tech Summit in April. Urvi and Nina, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
I've never heard both of you so quiet. So but thank you for joining. Thank you for being on polite manners. And so again, I just want to go to some comments so that you can see what people are saying and how they're interacting. And so we have, for example, I'm just going to the beginning. You have greetings from Egypt. This is where people are watching. Another one, hello everyone from Egypt. We have a third one, which is hello from Egypt. Lots of Egyptian friends, huh? Alison Alexander is watching on LinkedIn. Hi, Alison. Then we have obviously colleagues of ours. Daniel DG, as we call him, from Nigeria. Please tell us where you're watching from. Claire is in Turkey, and thank you, Claire, for doing this. My friend, Akil Dala, he's currently reading Give Work by Layla. By the way, Akil, Layla was a friend of mine. Okay. Alison is saying, what a great book to start with. And you're right. And again, Alison talks about Warhorse, which is amazing. Alison, what did you find that was so amazing? That's what I wanted to know. Give us your commentary online as well. And so Alison goes and says this is most importantly accessible for children and adults, which is great. Nilofer is watching from Bangladesh, which is fantastic. And Buse is from Turkey, from Ankara. Look forward to hearing the recommendation. Alejandra is joining in from Argentina as ever. Thank you so much. Must be quite early there. So Nina, I wanna come to you first, if that's okay. And of course, we should talk about education in Malaysia a little bit. But I was hoping that you would perhaps present your first book and tell us why you think it's a really great book for those people who haven't heard of it to get into.
Okay, great. So my first pick, Vikas, is the Malayan trilogy by a British author called Anthony Burgess. And why have I picked him? Well, number one, I think he is one of the most underrated and overlooked British authors of the 20th century, quite frankly. Not just because of the subject matter, because the Malayan trilogy is obviously set in what used to be Malaya, but I honestly think he is a brilliant writer, but wasn't really recognized in Britain. He is best known, of course, for A Clockwork Orange, or maybe he's known for it because of the Stanley Kubrick controversial movie adaptation.
That's a great book.
Yes, it is a great book, a really original, right, thinker. But nobody beyond A Clockwork Orange, I don't think people are very familiar with Burgess's work. I've picked the Malayan trilogy, and why should that be of interest to educators? Well, because Anthony Burgess was a teacher, and he was a teacher in what was then Malaya. His first book, Time for a Tiger, which is the first in the volume of this trilogy, was written as a history teacher in what was the Malay College in Malaysia, which is actually coincidentally a trust school within our network. Wonderful. It's now known as Malay College Kuala Kangsar, but he was posted as a British in the British colonial service as a teacher, a history teacher in the Malay College. And so that's when he started to write. From the Malay College, he was then posted as a teacher trainer in a state of Kelantan. So not only was a teacher, he was a teacher trainer. And that's when he began writing. And the book is all about his experiences in what was then Malaya. And he famously said, I came to Malaya a teacher and left a writer. So I think,
but give us an idea of what he's writing about, so we understand he's talking about
what he's writing about. Yeah, so it really follows the life of a fictional teacher called Victor Crabbe, obviously based on himself. How he turns up in Malaya. It's about his colleagues. It's about the pupils. And it's very much the struggles or the torment surrounding the end of colonial times, because he's writing in 1956, the late 50s, just as Britain is losing its foothold in the colony. So I think this book would be of interest to anyone from a Commonwealth country, because I think the issues and personalities and the struggles that he talks about has many commonalities with other Commonwealth countries. And it is amazing, because I think if Burgess were alive today, and if he were to walk into a Malaysian classroom, not much has changed, because so much of certainly Malaysia, Singapore, and other Commonwealth countries, so much of our education system is rooted in the British colonial times of the 1950s. You
say it with such disappointment. Explain that.
Well, I'm not one to blame the British for everything. But having said that, it is remarkable, despite us complaining about the Brits, how difficult it has been for most of us to move on, especially in our education structures and systems and processes.
Yeah, I mean, this is a whole different conversation for another interview. Yes, exactly. Urvi, tell us about your first choice.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. So my first choice is a book called Mindstorms, Children, Computers and Powerful Ideas by Seymour Papert. And I chose this book. So I'm currently studying a master's in education and technology, as Vikas mentioned earlier. through that, I picked up this book, and I have to admit it was a difficult read, but it is filled with incredible, inspiring ideas about the use of technology in education, but more importantly, about the purpose of education, about what learning is, and about how to do it differently so that it's a much more inspiring, a much more joyful, and a much more fulfilling experience for children. So Seymour Papert is known as the father of constructionism. So constructionism is about learning in a way that is a lot more tangible. You learn through making things, through experiencing things, through Papert uses a term, using objects to think with. And he gives an example of the programming language that he developed called Logo, which some of you may be familiar with, and the Logo, the turtle, and how he uses turtle geometry to make a subject like geometry, which all of us have learned in school, but it's done in a way that is much more engaging, much more a way that you can conceptually understand it and experience it in a tangible way. And he believes that that's the way that technology should be used in education. So this book was actually written in 1980.
Wow.
Yeah, 1980. So that was when computers were newly kind of being introduced into education, and his contemporaries were using it for computer aided instruction. So kind of trying to, in a way, replace teachers with the machines. And I think for Papert, he saw it as a way to rethink, with these new tools that we have, how do we rethink what education really is about, and how do we do it in a different way that is much more meaningful for learners and much more useful for them in their lives as well, as they grow and building the skills that are much more needed today.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Urvi. Nina, give us your second recommendation.
Okay. Well, I think my second recommendation needs no introduction, right? The Little Prince is one of the most loved, best-selling, most translated books of all time. But why have I picked it, and why should it be of relevance to educators? Well, I would go so far as to say it should be mandatory reading for every person who works with children and young people, simply as a reminder of what the importance of imagination and original thought, and how children think, and how important creativity is. I think, to me, the opening scene where the narrator, author, pilot, right, crashes in the Saharan desert, and then he's confronted, we don't know, it's probably a hallucination, but anyway, the whole book revolves around him and this golden-haired little boy, the Little Prince. And the Little Prince comes up to me and says, "S'il vous plaît, monsieur, please, sir, can you draw me a picture of a sheep?" Right? And so the author's the pilot's a little bit stunned, but draws a couple of pictures, and both times the boy looks disappointed. And then finally, in frustration, he says, "Look, here's a box." He drew a picture of a box, and he says, "The sheep is inside the box." And to me, that's a wonderful statement of outside the box, or in this case, inside the box thinking. And so much of our education system kills that kind of creativity, kills that ability to see things from a different and original point of view. So yes, I think someone else once pointed out that you should read The Little Prince, and it's a very, accessible book. I think it's 140 pages with beautiful illustrations by the author. Someone once said you should read The Little Prince 3 times, as a child, as a young adult or young person like Urvi, and as a fully grown up. So if you haven't read, or you haven't reread The Little Prince, please do so, because you will find something new every time you go back to it.
And Nina, the follow-up question I suppose I have for you is, fine, teachers read this, but what agency do they have to actually think creatively in the classroom?
Well, I think think there is autonomy within the classroom, right? I mean, of course, there are the strictures of the system and the syllabus and all of that stuff that, you know, you often can't run away from. But as an individual person interacting with another individual little person, there is no excuse to be rigid and strict in the way that you interact with young people. You have to be open. And I'm just so surprised at how often I come across teachers who are just so close-minded and unwilling to consider other points of view. So yes, I think it's something that you can take in your daily life, irrespective of the, you know, syllabus or admin duties that you need to conform to.
Well, thank you so much. Urvi, give us your second book.
So I'm going to, since Nina talked about, creativity, I'm going to come back to that. That's okay. Great. Okay. So I think you touched on a really important point, Nina, around creativity and how important it is to build that creativity during school and then also, of course, outside of school. And this is exactly what Sir Ken Robinson's book, Creative Schools, is about. And what I really liked about this book is it talks at a systemic level, kind of at a systemic level, why are schools the way they are? They were designed during the Industrial Revolution, and they were great to serve the purpose of those days. But today we need a lot more creativity, and the way that these systems and structures are designed and continue to kind of work actually kills creativity, which is very, very sad. But I think there's a lot that can be done and a lot that is being done. And Sir Ken Robinson is providing. I think what I loved was his stories. Actually, the stories of different things that are happening in schools and in other kind of institutions around the world. Creative educators working with creative kids to bring a new way of doing education that's much more holistic, much more in line with this idea of us being natural learners. So Vikas, you talked about the book Natural Born Learners, and this is a phrase that comes up in this book as well, where, you know, we are born to be curious, and as we go through systems that kind of make us be more rigid, to kind of know what's right and what's wrong, and do things a specific way, to work on learning how to pass exams. It kind of veers us away from this natural tendency of loving learning.
But why do you think? I mean, it's really great, and I often think about this, and I have friends who are ideologically opposed to what Ken Robinson says as well. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to ask you, in terms of, like, you know, you live in Singapore, you've worked there a long time. Nina, you live in Malaysia. You know, why is it that this revolution hasn't really sparked off?
I mean, I think that it's education is a long established institution, right? You look at, you know, at the government level, at the school level, and then you've got teachers and learners as well, educators and learners, and this idea of kind of having it needing to be centralized as well makes it very difficult for changes to happen. So even if there's changes at a central level that are very visionary, that are kind of more revolutionary in their ideas, it might be that once it gets to the school level, it might be kind of lost in translation, and a lot of different things in the systems that need to change in order to make it possible to live this new vision of education. So I think it's the complexity, and I think the need for high stakes standardized testing as well. I think that provides a certain constraint, let's put it, to being able to,
Urvi, thanks for that. I mean, Nina, this goes to your next book, actually, your next book choice almost.
Absolutely.
That's why I pick on this. So Nina, do you want to introduce your final book recommendation?
Yeah, my final book. And by the way, thank you very much, Urvi, for choosing creative schools, because I would have made the exact same connection between creativity and, creative schools. So my choice is Michael Fullan's Deep Learning, and his ideas really resonate with me and with LEAPED as an organization, because it informs directly the work that we do through our flagship program called the Trust Schools program. So in answer to your question, because yes, there are pockets of where a more creative, a less kind of emphasis on standardized testing. There are pockets of this happening, but in general, the system is slow to embrace and slow to pick up on this, right? So really, this whole deep learning movement goes beyond classroom pedagogies, and it really has to grapple with how we can galvanize the system, right, to be part of this journey. And so deep learning concepts were hugely influential for us when we redesigned our Trust School program back in 2017, 2018. And we recognized the importance of the system, because we had been so engrossed in the transformation that was taking place in schools. But we thought, how is this going to be sustainable? How is this going to be scalable if we don't bring the system on board? So one of the things that we did through our theory of change is to add a system dimension, because we knew that the changes we were seeing would not be sustainable without the system. But at the center are the 6 C's that Fullan talks about. Yes, citizenship and critical thinking and all those things that he talks about being good at life. Not necessarily being good at passing exams, which is the obsession in Malaysia and Singapore and, many other Asian countries. So how do we reframe that discussion about schools being places where we prepare young people for life? And I think that's where the world's best school, I have to commend T4 for launching the inaugural World Best School, because you really are reframing the discussion about strong schools and strong societies and looking beyond standardized testing and academic results.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nina. Urvi, I bring you back on the screen to share your last recommendation.
Sure. So my last recommendation is called Failure to Disrupt. So this is a book that's come out recently, and it's about why technology alone can't transform education. And this is particularly relevant in the field that I've been working in. And I found it quite thought-provoking and quite insightful. And I think the author takes a very a critical view of educational technologies, but yet a hopeful one. So looking at the history of educational technology, looking at kind of what has been developed, how have those solutions been implemented, and what impact has that had in education for educators, for learners. And he kind of sees trends that can help to predict how things might pan out in the future, which can then help us to figure out how we want to navigate making the changes that we want in education. So he kind of outlines 4 dilemmas, which I won't go through the 4 dilemmas here, but which is his explanation of why has the hype that we've heard about over the last 30 years, you've got a lot of hype around technology will transform education. And yes, there's been changes, but you can't call it transformation. And why has this not happened? And I think it's really fascinating. And for me, one of the dilemmas is the curse of the familiar, which he talks about, which resonates with me in the kind of the work that I was doing with Scratch programming earlier, actually, where and other kind of technologies or solutions that are trying to pedagogically change the way things are done, and do something new. And what Justin Reich kind of tells us is that actually when you build something that's familiar, so the things that are a lot more kind of direct instruction or kind of things that help you prepare for tests, things like that, then that is a lot more broadly adopted. But it doesn't really create much of a change. Whereas when you bring in new ideas and new technologies, it may confuse the audience. They may not know what to do with it, or they might adopt it, but then adopt it in a way that is used in the traditional means, so not with the intent of the new pedagogical purposes that it was designed for. And I think that when you look at the educational technologies out there, when you look at even the commercial enterprises that exist, and what problems are they trying to solve, and actually what do we think as a society we need in education in terms of the changes that we want. And what bothers me is that I don't see the right proportion of effort going in the right ways, from a personal perspective. And I think this book kind of helps to shed some light on it, and it kind of gives a call for educators and for kind of edtech practitioners to work a lot more closely together, and to kind of build a more of a grassroots movement to create that change for more progressive pedagogies, and for an education that actually develops a lot more creativity.
Nina, do you have any comments on Urvi's choices?
Yeah. I just wanted to say about the grassroots, the importance of grassroots. I mean, that links in with what Fullan talks about, this dynamic process. I think he calls it of exploit upward, but liberate downward, right? And that's exactly, I think, what we have to do, right? There has to be that empowerment that comes from grassroots, but at the same time, that pressure also must come from upward as well. So I think it's really interesting, I think, especially post-pandemic, to see how different systems and how different governments are responding to that upward, downward kind of, pressure. And some are responding better than others, I have to say.
And Urvi, any comments on Nina's books?
I mean, I think they're all three books that I haven't read, so I'm really excited you've really inspired me to pick up some new books, and really looking forward to reading them.
Well, thank you both for joining us. I want to end with another book recommendation, which I should have made at the beginning. And these are two friends of mine, and in fact, two mentors of mine, who've written a book. And my belief of making sure that we live in a world where we respect and love each other, and what is often called in our sector global citizenship, is their work is second to none. And that is Professor Fernando Remes of Harvard, and a friend of mine called Elisa Guerra, who is a teacher in Mexico, have written this amazing book called The Voices of the Trees, which has just been published, and you'll be really well placed to look this up. And what they do is they look at, they take 6 different contexts, and they tell a story through 6 different playgrounds, through 6 different trees, and that kind of thing, to give you an appreciation of what life looks like from that perspective for different audiences, different groupings of people. And I applaud them for this effort and their lifelong commitment actually to global citizenship. Nina, Urvi, thank you so much for joining this T4 Summer Book Spotlight. We hope to do another one, and I hope you'll tune in for it. Any last messages for teachers this summer, Nina?
Enjoy the rest of the summer, and stay hydrated if you're in the UK.
Indeed. And Urvi, last message from you?
As well, I think do share what you're reading. I think it's always wonderful to hear the comments about what other people have read and get inspired. So yeah, enjoy the time that you have, and let's keep sharing ideas. Well, thank you so much, both of you. And we look forward to next week's T4tv, which is with some special guests from HP, and I hope you'll be able to join us then. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you.